Hello everyone and welcome to like a very special video here today, right? So I'm here followed by chat, right, which you can't see because chat is invisible today, right? But anyway, so there's been this debate, right? Debate mostly started by me, but there's been this debate um, in a scenario, right, where we get the fire charmy, right? So some people believe that it could just be Droll, but it would have the charmy clause, right? So that you can't use it if you control cards, right? And in a world like that, right? In a world where we get a Droll that says you cannot use this if you control cards, would Droll or Fuwa be more toxic, right? And I hear a lot of people like disagree with the concept of Droll, and I kind of like disagree with them, right? I feel like Droll is one of the more healthy, like, made hand traps, right? And I'll explain why, right? I've tried to tackle a few points here and there, you know, when I'm asked or when I'm not asked, but I'll try to do like a more in-depth explanation for it today, right? So, so for all intents and purposes, right? Because of the charming clause, right, we're going to be considering this kind of situation, right? So I am going second, and I resolve Fuwa or I resolve Droll, right? In which of these scenarios is more toxic for the opponent, right? Or if I'm the player going first, which is more toxic? My opponent resolving a Fuwa or my opponent resolving a Droll, right? And let's get straight into it, right? I feel like the biggest elephant in the room right here, right, is I do not think that cards that say your opponent passes on a half board, which I think both of these cards kind of do, right? Like that's kind of their goal, right? Even though like then depending on like what kind of deck you're up against, it can just say win the game, right? But like at their core, I think these cards both say opponent passes on a half board, right? So you don't stop the opponent, you don't just say immediate no, but you do prevent them from just like doing too much, right? Now, in this case, right, I do not think that cards that say your opponent does half board should also draw cards on top, right? I feel like it was the problem with Maxi, right? People are always so quick to say, oh, but Maxi after a full board. I don't necessarily think that's the only problem with Maxi, right? Like Maxi at any point resolving is just very dumb, right? And the reason for that is because Fuwa obviously being like a weaker version of that. But the reason for that is because let's take, for example, like a Snake Eyes deck, right? I will say Snake Eyes, you know, like a bunch of times throughout this video. And the reason for that is because in Master Duel, when Fuwalos first came out, the deck that was in power was actually Snake Eyes, right? So, and it was used as like Fuwa was one of the cards that was keeping it in check, let's say. Not really, but you get in like Konami terms, right? So yeah, a Snake Eyes deck, right, will usually give one or two draws, right, to do an IP pass board, right, and then have some follow up. Can stack Fuwa as well. That's like a horrendous thing altogether, right? We can get into it, but I think like chaining Fuwa to Fuwa is one of the worst things like to ever happen. But um yeah, so Snake Eyes would give one or two draws to end on an IP board, like IP pass. So IP into SP is effectively just like two disruptions, maybe like one, depending on if the deck can play around it, but we're gonna count it as two, right? So these two disruptions, I would say, would be fair if the opponent were to start with 5 cards in hand, you know? So basically, like, you use the hand trap, right? Your opponent did a half board, and now you have the rest of your 5 cards, you know, to play through it. However, that's not what it does, right? Because of Fuwa, you get 2 more draws, and now, like, the IP pass will somehow have to contest 7 cards in hand. Why? You know, like I don't think that that kind of game set is ever fair, right? And now, there's decks that are inherently being tried to made to play around Fualos, right? But I feel like that's just like a power creep sort of sense, right? Where like Konami invents these cards, right? And then like makes the decks good into these hand traps so that they can sell them later, right? And I feel like we've seen that a bunch of times. You know, like Yami has a pretty decent like Fuwalos board, right? Dracotel is like a pretty decent Fuwalos board. Malice had like a pretty decent Fuwalos board as well, actually, you know. So there were definitely a bunch of decks that like after Fuwalos came out, they definitely had a pretty decent matchup in the Fuwalos, but that's because they were designed to like be good into Fuwalos, right? But that does not solve the problem for all the other decks before that, you know, like all the other decks, you know, especially older decks like rogue decks, they are horrible into Fuwalos, right? So that does not help, right? So my point stands that cards that make the opponent pass on a half board should never draw cards on top of it, right? Because then it's just not fair, right? The half board is supposed to contain a smaller amount of cards in hand, not more, right? There's no way where you can just end on a board of like 3-4 disruptions, right? And then the opponent has like 11 cards in hand and you're somehow supposed to win that, you know? Then it just becomes an unfair advantage, right? However, Droll does not have that issue, right? So let's say you Droll a Ryzeal player, a deck that's like kind of like inherently like known to get countered by Droll, right? A Ryzeal player will a lot of the time, most of the time, 99% of the time, always end on at least a detonator pass, right? A bunch of time, depending on start, if they start with like whatever, with the sword Ryzeal, right? They will also have the field spell, right? So we're just gonna count it as like 2 pops and 1 negate, right? 2 pops, 1 negate, or 3 pops. We're gonna say 3 disruptions, right? So now, because you draw them, right? These 3 disruptions will have to contest 5 cards in hand, right? And that's not just a completely unwinnable game state. I'm sorry, for Ryzeal. That's not, right? Because now it's just like a way more balanced number between the amount of interaction they have and the amount of like playable cards you have in hand. So this is like the biggest issue with Fuwa versus Droll in my opinion, right? And I feel like Droll tackles that issue like a lot better than Fuwa does, right? Reason number 2 why I think like Droll is way more healthy. Droll actually enables gameplay, right? So we've seen time and time again, right? In metas where Droll was relevant, right? That people can actually do certain like gameplay maneuvers to play around the Droll, right? In Pearly, Pearly would use the quick play spells, right? In draw phase to then get their searches, right? Because Pearly is a deck that, you know, does like a bunch of their searches. You know, they do like to search a bunch of times, 3-4 times do, right? So they were forced to play in draw phase, right? To play around the draw. Now that would make it so that they would play around, they would play into like a possible imperm, right? So for example, if you have a field spell in hand, right, you would have to value. Okay, so would I rather play around Droll or would I rather play around imperm, right? And I feel like that's gameplay choices, right? And I feel like that adds a layer of gameplay to it. Other decks, you know, for example, Dracotel. I've seen Dracotel players lose to Droll. Why? And I mean this in rated. Again, these are just bad plays. I saw somebody activate key to add Lucius, I Droll, he passes turn. Why are we doing this? You know, like Droll being able to punish bad plays and players having ways to play around the Droll with just gameplay alone, right? Makes it a better card. Because Fuwa does not have this this thing, right? So Fuwa, your deck either has a good matchup into it or it doesn't. There's no such thing as though I outplayed the Fuwa. That is a sentence that has never been said before, right? Never. I just made that up. That's never been said before, right? You can't, like, the most you can ever do to Fuwa is, oh, I chained a special summon to the Fuwa, so now my opponent gets like 1 Death Draw. Woohoo! Like, Upstart Goblin defeated. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of the thing, right? Like these kind of like gameplay choices that Droll enables, but Fuwa doesn't, right? It's just a lot less interesting to try and play around the Fuwalos or play around the Droll, right? And that, like, even decks that don't like have like a medium matchup in the Droll, right? They have to choose. Okay, so like which hand trap? Which is my most important search here, right? So let me get my most important search out, right? And then if I get Drolled, it's not as bad. Instead of starting with like a very like autopilot version of like, okay, search this card, search 3 times, and then you lose to the first draw, right? So because of gameplay reasons, I feel like Droll is a lot more healthy, right? Moving on though, right, to the third point. Droll is almost never a full turn scoop, a full turn stop, right? Almost never, right? And in the cases when it is, you never intended to do anything fair, right? Let me elaborate. So, people say like certain decks are being kept in check by Droll. I say this as a previous Dark World Danger player. As a Dark World Danger player, I do not deserve to go first and not get Drolled, okay? I'll say this right now. I play around mostly every other hand trap, right? If they max see me, I like just I just deck them out, right? So, I never intended to do anything fair. My board is like 11 like billion disruptions. You are not breaking that. So decks like that are being kept in check by Droll, they again never intended to be fair in the first place, right? Even though they can't do anything under Droll, right? However, for most other decks, like 99% of decks in the game, it's not like a full turn lose, right? They can always set up something. And even like I've seen people say like, oh well, what about Sky Striker? Sky Striker gets cooked by Droll, right? I mean, does it though? Does it really? Let's say you start with a Rose, right? Your Rose going to a Link 2 searches your engage usually, right? I mean, what if you choose not to lose to Droll, right? What if you go Link 2, search your Widow Anchor, and now you have your Widow Anchor negate, you have your Link 2 pop, you have whatever the rest of your hand is, and now it's like a lot less miserable. Why? Because you chose to respect the Droll. And I feel like that's good. That's good gameplay. Am I crazy for saying that kind of gameplay is good? Like for when you like have a strategy on trying to play around Droll instead of just saying, oh well, I just want to do my full combo, right? And then people will say like, oh well, but like if I do that, then I don't get my full combo in Sky Striker or in X deck or in Y deck. That's the point. The point is so that you don't get your full combo, so that I, as the going second upstanding civilian, have a chance at breaking it, right? And that's the whole idea, And then we have Stars in chat right now, right? And she's saying, oh well, what about White Forest? White Forest Finsmith has been a thing before, Like White Forest can just choose to add the Finsmith back, If Droll is relevant, right? And you know that you have nothing against Droll, right? You can just go like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna have the Finsmith back in my deck, right? And putting 2 bodies on the field is really easy for White Forest, even under Droll, right? Like, you start with your LZ, you get your 1 search, you get Droll, you go like the LZ is the level 2, you normal summon your tuner, no effect, right? Link 2 into Closed Moon, going to Finsmith, right? Now you might be like, okay, but like Finsmith, yes, Finsmith leads to Desiree 2 negates, right? Or like not Desiree, Caesar 2 negates, or the Desiree like untargetable negate, right? Now, in this kind of state, right, it's a Caesar, we're gonna call it, a 2 disruption, right? Against a 5 hand, a 5 card hand, right? And I feel like that's fair, like in case you have something in the back as well, like. And I feel like that's really honestly fair. I feel like that's good gameplay, Like why? Because Droll enables real deck building, right? Which is the 4th point here. Because Droll enables real deck building, I feel like Droll is just like a way better design card. And here's another one. Yami just came out in Master Duel, right? Like, and by just came out, I mean like a week ago. And people at the start were like, okay, you know what? Engage into Hornet Drones because like Hornet Drones is 1 card Yami combo, right? So like, yeah, we're just gonna be doing like 3 engages. A lot of people dropped that, right? I never did 3 engages, but that's because I was broke. I was not gonna try to crack the URs. But now I'm glad that I didn't because I see the vision. And now people are dropping engages. And do you know why? Because engage is the only starter in the deck that absolutely folds to Droll. It has no chance. You don't play under Droll. You go engage, add the Hornet Drones, you either have the extender or you pass your turn like a bozo, right? So people realize that, you know what? this kind of sucks, you know, because Droll is in the meta now. So what are we doing, right? What are we doing? We're just gonna cut these and we're gonna play Hornet Drones as a one-off. Like, just like the one of Hornet Drones is just like an extra one-card combo that you can play, right? And then we can play like more handshots, or we can play like actual quality extender. Shout out to the Jester, right? You know, when I first like looked at the Jester, I was like, this card is good, you know. And then I started spreading the agenda. I look at where we are now. You know, some people believe it, some people don't. Whatever, doesn't matter. That's not the point, right? The point is, like, we have enabled, because of Droll, we have enabled better deck building in certain things, and I feel like that is actually interesting deck building, unlike with Fuwa over here, right? Because you know what the Fuwa deck building is? Add 3 ashes, 1 cross out, 1 cold bite to your deck. And I think, you know, like, I don't think that's any interesting, you know? They're just playing like the same, like, what is it, like 5 cards now, I guess, because, you know, like, 1 cold bite was gone. The same 5 cards in your deck because your deck just can't play around it, you know? And I feel like that's horrible, you know? That's not real deck building. They're just having to play cards that you may not want to play, but you have to because, you know, we had the same problem before with Maxi, we have the same problem now with Fuwa, right? Because Fuwa, you know, when it resolves, it's just not a fair thing, you know? And I feel like it's just, you know, and that on top of the fact that the way to stop your Fuwa a lot of the time is play the minigame, draw the out. With Droll is not as you can't ask your Droll, right? It's just like, okay, if you have your call by or your cross out, whatever, yeah, you negated it. Enjoy. Why are those cards in the game? Don't ask me. Get them out of here. But the point is, right? Droll is not like a minigame kind of card, right? Which I really enjoy. I really enjoy that Droll is not a minigame card. So yeah, the Droll does encourage real deck building, and Fuwa doesn't, right? So, like, just for that, you know, like, 4th point, Fuwa is toxic, Droll is actually healthy, right? And then the 5th point on why Droll is better. Let's take this scenario, right? So you are an honest civilian, right? An upstanding member of society, and you are going first, right? And then you have all gas in hand. If you get Drolled, you're like, okay, so you know what? Instead of having to search this card, whatever it is, right? I instead have it in hand, right? So I use the cards that I drew, right, the engine, to make a better board into Droll, right? So instead of making like a 2 or 3 disruption board, I can make like a 4 or 5, you know? No, so basically, like, I can extend my plays using my engine. If I get Fuwalos and my hand is all engine, I go into the cogwheel and I press surrender, right? Because it's awful, right? I'm playing with 5 bricks, right? Because I can't just like vomit them onto the field, because then that just gives them advantage. So I get punished for the gas hand, whereas I, like, you know, if both hands draw other hand shots to back them up, you know, that's like, you know, like for both it's the same thing, right? So both pass on something, and then you have the 4 hand shots in the back, and you're kind of chilling, right? But Fuwa does punish you for the engine, and I feel like that's bad. Like, why do we punish people for drawing the engine, for drawing the actual cards of the deck? Like, why are you getting punished in Snake Eyes for drawing Snake Eyes card, but you're not getting punished for drawing like Ash? I'm not gonna say Ash because Ash negates the Fuwa, right? For why are you not getting punished for drawing like Nib Imperm Droll? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, you know, I feel like it's just like hand trap mini games are just a lot less like fun as concepts, right? So I feel like that's just kind of the point here, right? And, you know, like, getting punished for all gas hands is something that has happened like since like man was first made, right? And it has to stop. Like, this is why I really dislike the Fuwalos, right? Like, please, like, let these this needs to go, right? I don't think this is the way to solve the meta, right? And you might be like, okay, but like, Droll has this thing where it's like, Droll is not that good into every deck, right? Like, Droll comes in and out of the metas, right? Like, it's not as strong as Fuwalos, right? Fuwalos is just like very consistently in the meta, you know? At least like MD wise. I'm an MD player, so I talk about MD metas. I don't know. I don't know about ECG. So yeah. Mario, shut up. So, about ending metas, right? So how do we fix it, right? I feel like cards like Droll can be printed for more than just the searches, right? Like imagine like the point of like Nib, for example, I feel like at the core is good, right? And then just devolve into a shit show, right? Like Nib at the core was like, okay, let me choose to play around this hand trap, right? And like we've seen that before, like we've seen Pac like win a game in YCS. I don't ask me what game. I just saw the clip, right? But like it was like he was playing Unchained, right? And then he said, you know what? From this position, the only way I lose is if I int into a nib. He chose not to, and he won that game, right? That is a pro player choice. That is the choice of a player that said, you know what? Instead of being a bozo, I'll instead choose to win this game, right? And I feel like that's what made Nib, and then it just devolved into, oh, every deck now needs to have an out for Nib, right? And if it doesn't have an out, it's kind of ass, right? And now like I don't remember the last time Nib was like fucking great in the game. It's miserable. Like why does every deck have the out? You know, first we had a Finsmith and like Apollo and like a billion other things, and like why are we doing this? You know? Like, oh, make negate on 5th summon. That's like the game plan of every combo deck right now, you know? And but without like getting out of topic too much, right? Like we could do something like that with Droll, for example, you know? Like for example, let's say your opponent says, okay, after the third summon, you know, from deck, activate this from a deck or extra deck, you know? Activate this, your opponent can no longer summon from a deck or extra deck, right? It sounds toxic, but hear me out. How is that any different from Fuwalos, right? Illusion of choice here, right? I know you're gonna be like, oh well, but Fuwalos doesn't float game you, right? Illusion of choice. Are you really going to give your opponent more than 2 to 3 draws for a half board when you're under Fuwalos? I don't think so. I really don't. Right? I really don't think so. So illusion of choice here. If a card were to say your opponent can only special summon 3 times, how is that any different? Except the half board will have to play into a reasonable amount of cards, right? Because instead of just having to play against like effective non-games there, where it's like 3 disruptions versus 9 cards in hand, that's a non-game. That's not a fun game set. You lost because you did not have the out of Fuwalos. You did not try to. There was no way to outplay the Fuwalos there, right? There was no gameplay choice what you could have made, right? The gameplay choice was play a deck that doesn't lose to Fuwalos, GB caught. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just very miserable here, you know? You know, yeah. My chat right now is also saying the same thing, right? It's like, yeah, this is why I just play Dracotel, because I'm just sick of the Fuwalos minigame, right? And I don't blame them. I do not blame them, you know? So yeah, I think these were my main points on why I think that Droll is actually a very fair card, right? Like again, like if your deck fully loses to Droll, no can do any plays whatsoever, right? You never intended to do anything fair, and that is my take on it. You never did. You never intended to do anything fair, right? And I say that as a Blackwing player. I say that as a Dark World player. I say that as a previous Dragon Link player, right? I love my decks that lose to I love my decks that lose to Droll. You know? I love them. Right? But I can also understand that like that they are kind of bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Like they're kind of trolling, right? So yeah, you know. So yeah. I'm just looking for chat. I'm just looking at chat, you know, in case they have any more questions, I can try to like answer some more questions that people might have, you know. And that's my take on it, right? Let me know what you think about this in the comments, or like, I don't know, make a reply video to this. Up to you guys, whoever you are. I love you all anyway, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye. Mwah.